December 1944. In a small Belgian town called Bastogne, something extraordinary happened. Not on the battlefield, but in the freezing darkness beneath the streets, where mothers and daughters became angels. This is not a story of tanks or generals. This is a story of white bed sheets, of courage in a cellar, and of two women who chose to save lives, even when the world above them was tearing itself apart. Stay with me, because what happened in those 10 frozen days changed everything.
Bastogne was never a grand city, just a quiet crossroads town, home to about 3,500 souls. Families who had lived there for generations, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, people who knew each other's names. The kind of place where everyone gathered at the same church on Sunday mornings, and children played in the same cobblestone square their grandparents had. 7 roads met in Bastogne, 7 roads connecting the world beyond. And in December of 1944, those roads would become the reason this town could not escape. Because when the coldest winter in memory arrived, it brought with it something far worse than snow.
December 16th, the German offensive began. Not here, not in this quiet town, but in the forests to the east. At first, it was only rumors, whispers in the market square, distant explosions like summer thunder. But by December 20th, the roads were cut, all 7 of them. Bastogne was surrounded. There would be no evacuation, no escape. The families, the elderly, the children, everyone was trapped. Imagine that moment. The realization that the war you had been living through for 4 long years had suddenly come to your doorstep, and there was nowhere left to run.
When the shelling started, life moved underground. Families gathered what they could carry: blankets, a few tins of food, photographs, and descended into their cellars, into basements, into church crypts, into the damp stone refuge beneath the seminary, where Abbé Jean-Baptiste Mousti opened his doors to anyone seeking shelter. It was bitterly cold down there, so cold you could see your breath in the darkness. Families huddled together on filthy mattresses, trying to keep warm. Mothers held their children close, whispering that everything would be all right, even though they didn't believe it themselves. And then the sounds began. The whistle of the shells, the explosions that shook the earth above, and sometimes the cry of a baby echoing in the darkness. That sound, the sound of a child, terrified and cold, was harder to bear than the bombs. Days passed, or was it weeks? Down there, in the darkness, time lost all meaning. The only rhythm was the rhythm of fear. These families had already survived 4 years of occupation, 4 years of rationing, of hunger, of loss. But this was different. The siege had cut off the last fragile sources of food. Mothers tried to stretch what little they had: a tin of soup shared among 6 people, a crust of bread saved for the children. But it was never enough, and the cold crept into your bones, It didn't matter how many blankets you piled on, you could never get warm. And above them, always above them, the war raged on. The German forces tightening the noose, the American defenders holding the line. But down in those cellars, the people of Bastogne could only wait and pray.
But even in the darkest places, light finds a way. Her name was Augusta Chiwy. She was a nurse, trained in Leuven, a Black Belgian woman who had come to Bastogne to visit her family just before the battle began. When the town was surrounded, Augusta did not hide. She volunteered. She stepped forward into the freezing chaos, into the makeshift hospitals set up in basements where wounded soldiers, American boys, far from home, were dying. There was almost no anesthesia, no proper bandages, no warmth, just suffering. And Augusta moved through that suffering like an angel. She tended to the worst cases, the ones no one else wanted to touch. And when the shelling grew too heavy, when it was too dangerous to move, Augusta went anyway. She ran through the streets under fire to bring back the wounded, to save one more life.
But even here, even in this place of suffering, Augusta faced another enemy. Not all the soldiers welcomed her care. Some objected, because Augusta was black. In the middle of a war, in the middle of a siege, with death all around them, some still clung to their prejudice. But then something happened. The battalion surgeon, Dr. Pryor, heard the complaints, and he responded. He told them that if they refused care from Nurse Chiwy, they were welcome to join the frozen corpses outside. Life was all that mattered now, and Augusta Chiwy was saving lives. They accepted her care, and many of them owed her their lives.
Augusta was not alone. There was another woman, another angel, working beside her. Her name was Renée Lemaire. Renée had returned to Bastogne, to her hometown, to be near her family. And when the siege began, she too volunteered. Renée was gentle, kind, the kind of person who always had a soft word for the wounded, even when she was exhausted, even when there was no more morphine to ease their pain. Together, Augusta and Renée worked day and night, two women in a freezing basement trying to hold back the tide of death. But December was not finished with Bastogne yet.
While the nurses fought for lives in the cellars, another act of courage was unfolding above. The American soldiers defending the town had a problem. They were trying to hold positions in the snow, but their uniforms were dark, easy to spot, easy targets. And so, the women of Bastogne did something extraordinary. They gave up their bedsheets, their tablecloths, their white curtains. These were not wealthy people. These families had so little left, but they took what little white fabric they had and they gave it to the soldiers, to cover them, to hide them, to keep them alive. It was such a small thing, a threadbare sheet, a worn curtain, but in that moment, it meant everything. It was the moment the people of Bastogne said, "We are with you. We will endure together."
For days, the clouds had hung low, thick, gray, unbreakable. The fog that had hidden the German advance now hid the sky. And without the sky, there could be no help. The soldiers were running out of ammunition.
The townspeople out of food, the nurses out of medicine. And then, on December 21st, something changed. The weather cleared, and the people heard it. A sound distant at first, like thunder, but different. Engines. Airplane engines. They ran out of the cellars into the frozen streets, and they looked up. And there, filling the sky, were hundreds of planes. C-47s, American transport planes, and falling from them like snow were parachutes. Hundreds of them. Red, white, green, blue, a shower of color against the gray winter sky. They carried medicine, food, whole blood for transfusions, hope. The people of Bastogne stood there, watching, and for the first time in days, they wept. Not from fear, but from relief. They had not been forgotten.
But the war was not finished. Christmas Eve, 1944. Renée Lemaire was working in a basement hospital, tending to the wounded. Augusta was in a nearby building. And then a shell. One German bomb. It struck the basement where Renée was working. She was killed instantly, along with 30 of her patients. Augusta heard the explosion. She ran through the smoke, but there was nothing she could do. Renée was gone, and Augusta was left alone. To carry on, to keep saving lives, even though her heart was breaking.
On December 26th, Patton's Third Army broke through. The siege was lifted, but the town was not safe. Not yet. 4 days later, on December 30th, the Luftwaffe launched one final attack. 73 planes. The people who had survived the siege now had to survive the bombers. But they did. Slowly, families began to emerge from the cellars, from the crypts. They climbed the stone steps back into the light and saw what was left. Bomb-cratered streets, shell-torn houses, the smell of smoke and embers, and the silence of those who would never return.
For the children who had lived through those 10 days, the war did not end. Not inside. They had spent Christmas in the dark, listening to bombs, feeling the earth shake, watching their mothers try not to cry. And even after the soldiers left, even after the town was rebuilt, those memories stayed. The nightmares, the fear of loud noises, the feeling that something terrible might happen again. Psychologists today would call this trauma, a normal reaction to abnormal events. These children were not weak. They were survivors, and they carried the weight of survival for the rest of their lives.
Today, if you visit Bastogne, you will see how they remember. The main square is called McAuliffe Square, named for the general who held the line. But walk a little further, and you will find streets named for the angels. Rue Renée Lemaire, a quiet street where her name lives on. And Augusta Chiwy, the woman who faced fire and prejudice and kept saving lives, she was finally recognized decades later. She received the United States Army Civilian Award for Humanitarian Service, not because she asked for it, but because the world finally understood what she had done. On a hill, overlooking Bastogne, stands the Martysan Memorial, a five-pointed star made of stone. It was built to honor the American soldiers who fought and died in the Battle of the Bulge. From the top, you can see the entire valley, the peaceful fields, the quiet forests. It is hard to imagine, standing there, that this land was once a battlefield. But the memorial reminds you, that freedom is not free, that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what must be done, even when you are terrified.
So, what do we learn from Bastogne? We learned that the greatest acts of courage are not always found on the battlefield. Sometimes they are found in a cellar, in a threadbare bedsheet, in the hands of a nurse who chose to stay. We learn that humanity endures, even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest hour. The people of Bastogne did not have much, but they had each other. And that was enough. If this story moved you, if you believe these voices should not be forgotten, I would be honored if you would subscribe. There are so many more stories like this one, stories of courage, of sacrifice, of hope. And I would love to share them with you. Thank you for listening. And may we never forget the angels of Bastogne.